Dystopian literature. So dystopian literature is a branch of speculative fiction. Now, speculative fiction is probably a term you've not heard before. It includes things like science fiction, so anything involving aliens or time travel or spaceships or crazy technology, androids, all of that science fiction. Speculative fiction also includes fantasy. So in this case, we'd get stuff like Harry Potter or knights and castles, anything involving dragons. You're in the realm of fantasy. Speculative fiction can also include alternative histories. So this would be like The Man in the High Castle, where you have an imaginative scenario and ask, well, what would have happened if the Nazis had won World War II? Speculative fiction also includes horror. So slasher films, zombie movies, things coming back from the dead, and any other type of supernatural fiction. The X-Files, demons, monsters, all of that falls into the realm of speculative fiction. Fiction that's imagining a reality that's different than the reality we happen to inhabit. Dystopian literature, of course, is also then an aspect of speculative fiction. And dystopian fiction can be a little bit hard to pin down because it can have all of the elements I've just mentioned in it, but especially environmental degradation and scarcity, things like eugenics, technology that's gone out of control, social control of people's bodies, authoritarian regimes. But the big thing that really marks dystopian literature is a lack of freedom and a deep, pervasive sense of distrust that's created within a society. Usually you're going to have corrupt social structures and political structures. Usually you're going to have economic issues stemming from this, like big wealth gaps. You're going to have a government that is very, very invasive or very, very non-existent. And sex is always going to be an issue in a dystopia. People's bodies will be controlled in ways that will be harmful to them and to the wider community. So why would we even want to think about dystopian fiction? It sounds like a nightmare, and it is. But dystopias help us to consider what life might look like when pushed to its extremes. And especially it creates really helpful experiments for us to wrestle with ethics and to think about when all of the comforts and the securities of kind of a middling sort of life are removed. Well, what happens then? Does good still look the same when you can't trust your leaders and when you have no say over your own future? Does the right ethical choice look the same when the issue on the table is survival and bravery isn't really an option anymore? Does goodness look the same when the questions of agency are completely removed from a character and they have no ability to actually make a decision for themselves? Because the only options on the table are all bad ones and none of them are of the character's own choosing. And so in a class like this where we're thinking about ethical reasoning, dystopias provide a fabulous opportunity to wrestle with kind of the borders of our ethics and to figure out if some of the systems we've been looking at with Aristotle and Kant and Mills will actually work when pushed out there, when not being considered from positions of privilege and wealth in Europe or in ancient Greece. So when did dystopias begin? Well, literary scholars like me love to argue over the origins of anything, but most of us agree that Gulliver's Travels in 1726 is actually the first real dystopia, as he visits different communities that seem good on the surface, but oftentimes end up having deep dysfunction that cut deep into the human, or in these cases, non-human people that make up the societies that Gulliver discovers. Dystopias grow in the 1800s, especially toward the end of the 1800s, but they really flourish in the 20th and 21st centuries. And when you think about the changes that wrecked the world through World War I and World War II and the Cold War, and then the ongoing power struggles of capitalist empires, it's not surprising that questions of dystopia and what makes a society good or how we wrestle with societies that are deeply broken would be on the forefront of writers' minds. Dystopias give us a vision of where we are headed, especially where we are headed if we don't change course. In this way, we could almost say that dystopias are a bit like the biblical prophets. They remind us of the things that we should value by showing us the alternative, what might happen if we don't stay true to our values, especially values around the dignity of the human person, values around the importance of freedom, values around the importance of the wise use of the resources we have and the technologies at hand. And so that's why we're going to be looking at dystopian fiction in this course. Now, there's a few major themes that are going to emerge in all of the novels we're going to look at. We're going to look at power. How does power work itself out in the lives of these characters? Because all dystopias are about power. We're going to look at survival, because so often these characters are going to be facing circumstances that mean all they can really ask is, how do I get from here to tomorrow in one piece? And so we're going to be looking at how survival is worked out. We're going to be looking at freedom. What does it mean to be free, and how is freedom constructed? Is freedom something that we can ever really experience, or is my freedom always going to be predicated upon the suffering and the oppression of someone else? We're going to consider the interrelationship between love and justice, because love is oftentimes deeply lacking in dystopian societies, especially ones where you can't trust other people. And of course, justice is a big part of love. You can't love other people when there is injustice that you are perpetrating against them or that you are allowing to come against them. So we're going to look at justice with love. And finally, we're going to ask questions about what is good. What does goodness mean here in this place, not in some removed ideal where everything is perfect, but what does goodness look right here in this very broken and in fact very evil reality that we are inhabiting in our dystopias? Now, I want to say something really serious now as we break into this part of the class. The novels we are going to be reading are going to involve a great deal of violence against the human person. This is going to come in the form of racial violence, in terms of physical brutality, and also in the form of sexual violence. For some of you, these books might be deeply triggering. And even if they're not triggering for you, there is a good chance that people in the class or other people in your community have had the sorts of horrible experiences we're going to be reading about come against them in real life. We're going to be looking at some of the worst moments that people face. If you find some of these texts really difficult for you, I want to encourage you that you have permission to skip over parts that you find just touch a little bit too close to home. When there are those moments that you feel your heart starting to race and your hands starting to tremble and you think, I just don't want to be back in this place, feel free to skip ahead. I'd encourage you, though, not to check out, not entirely. Take care of yourself. Surround yourself with the good and supportive community that you need. Reach out to people here at George Fox. We have wonderful resources in the IRC and in student life. But keep engaging, because the horrible things we face in this world will only get better if we work together to figure out how to change the circumstances that make people think it's okay to use other people as means to their own pleasure and their own power. So I just want to warn you about these books because they will be hard. I'm not going to give a trigger warning for each book. This is kind of the blanket for all of them. But know that you have permission to skim if you need to or skip ahead. And also know that we are here for you at George Fox to walk with you through the hardness that you or other people in your community may have faced around these issues. And so with that, let's start thinking about how this world is broken and all of the ways that we might be part of helping to make it better.